is to share with you a wonderful resource called The Spirituality of Fundraising. Wonderful Henry Nouwen has made, I sometimes think he gave this gift personally to us at ECF because it encompasses and frames fundraising in a spiritual way that only Henry could put into words. So keep this in mind when you are going through the anxiety or struggles or trying to let people know why it's important to raise money for the church annually, capital campaign, whenever. People have such a need for friendship and for community that fundraising has to be community building. I wonder how many churches and charitable organizations realize that community is one of the greatest gifts they have to offer. If we ask for money, it means we offer a new way of belonging. And I come back to this little book. It's a little book. It is a great gift for your stewardship chair, for your vestry, for your rector. I think they would appreciate it too. So I would, it's worth its weight in gold, believe me. So talking about different fund resources for your mission and ministry, there are really three basics. You've got your annual stewardship, which is your annual giving. This is your annual budget. The people who give to this, their monies tend to be coming out of their annual budgets too. Capital giving, or a capital campaign, is extraordinary giving. And this does not come around every year. Just like you need to put a new roof on or repave your driveway, these are large expenditures that come up on occasion. Really every 8 to 10 years we recommend churches looking at doing a capital campaign. And the final funding is through planned giving that Terry referred to earlier. And churches have not done a great job at making this available or keeping it fresh in people's minds, that remembering the church in your will is a very important way to keep your church alive and giving to the future. So at ECF, if we work with a client in a capital campaign, we also take great care to make sure that all three of these areas are strong, understood, and set up before we're done with a capital campaign. So if this cartoon rings true in any of your situations, are you ready for a capital campaign? Is this something your vestry or leadership has known that they need to do but really doesn't want to talk about it? This elephant in the room, it's either in the church. Is the roof leaking? Is it weighing heavy on your annual budget? Do you have debt that is keeping you from living more fully into your mission and ministry? It's time to identify and deal with the elephant. So ECF approaches, our methodology actually has three separate phases. Discernment, the study, and the ask. Often, we have people call us and say, okay, we've got our blueprints, we have our plans, Buildings and Grounds Committee has been working on this for years, we've had multiple vestries talk about this, we are finally ready for a capital campaign, will you do a feasibility study for us? And this is often when we have to push back people who are now very eager and ready to get going with what they've been planning on for years and say, you know, that's great, but have you involved the congregation in these plans? Often committees are way ahead of where anybody else is with the knowledge of deferred maintenance, future projects, that sort of thing. So we back you up a little bit and say, let's make sure all of the communicating has been done. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, more so about discernment than the other two, because it really is the most important phase in a campaign. I apologize for the word. We at ECF are trying to invent a new word. That's not discernment, because often I see people's faces just sag and say, oh gosh, more discernment, more breaks. This is going to take months and months and months to, re-examine. It doesn't have to. But really what you're talking about is a communication phase and an inclusivity phase. Unless your vestry and Buildings and Ground Committee want to pull out their checkbooks and fund the entire project, you need to make this a congregational activity and vision and project. So we go back to that question. What is God calling you to be or do in this community? And this is not just for your vestry. This is for the entire congregation. And once that's identified, what do you need to fulfill the vision? What is holding you back? Do you have debt that is draining your annual budget that would enable you to do more outreach or to fund more things to do with the youth, that sort of thing? Whatever it is, you want to identify it here. This creates ownership. So in the end, people feel that they were part of the idea, part of the creation of the plan. It involves people to look at these needs. People are very practical, and I think sometimes committees worry, as we all do. It's easier to get something done with 2 people than with 50 people. But people have to feel a part of the vision. They have to feel that they were heard, and often they have very, very key ideas that will make your project successful. You don't want to get to the end and hear a good idea and say, we should have done that. It's also your communicating time, listening and communicating. If you have done plans, if you have had a committee looking into expensive repairs or buildings, it's the time to communicate that, but it's also your time to get feedback from people. So the nitty-gritty of discernment basically is, this is the how-tos, how we would do it. We go to small groups. We would work with you to schedule and gather maybe groups of 10 people, foyer-type groups, very informal and comfortable. Many people are not going to speak up at a large parish meeting to say what's on their mind, to say something that they think maybe is too minute, and feel much more comfortable in a group of 10, where where it's stressed that we really do want to hear what you think about this. We also would do large parish meetings to introduce the process, maybe to flesh out some things. We would meet with individuals. Certainly if you have people with capacity to make lead gifts, they should be included in this phase and spoken to get their feedback. And let them know that you are doing thorough, transparent work from the get-go. This is when you'd be consulting with professionals, either people to get quotes on buildings, permits. All of that takes time. So you can run this sort of parallel with feedback from the congregation. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. You can have 2 things going on at once. Keep the communication going. Report back to the congregation what you heard in the small group meetings, and let people know that they are being heard. Finally, the proposed plans and costs are shared with the congregation, and the vestry usually will go ahead and approve and say, here are the projects we're going to test for. This is not your campaign. And this is all leading up to your feasibility study. The side effects, this is what I like to call the good transformational side effects of discernment, is that process of small groups and listening and hearing and note-taking and reporting back leads to things like deciding that the rummage sale that we have done for 15 years that is really burning out our volunteers, it's time to stop. And we are going to celebrate it because it served a purpose and it was great at some time. If there's some other event that is really pulling your volunteers down and it's just gone the way of other things. Its time was over. It was a great time when it started. Now it's time to say goodbye and celebrate the past, celebrate what's been done in the past. New dreams are identified. Low-hanging fruit, as we call it, is identified. If we just had an article in Vital Practices this week from a consultant who had a parish that a woman for 30 years had been asking for a sink sprayer to clean the dishes in the sink. It was like an $11.95 item. She finally got it. You didn't have to wait for a capital campaign to do it, but those things are often identified at this point, and things can be done immediately. You've also got the congregation engaged and empowered and thinking about future mission and what separates you from the church down the street. You're building an identity and you're building community. Now you're ready for a feasibility study. And before I go on with that, I'm going to ask if there are any questions at this point with discernment. And at any time, if you have a question, please type it in, and Terry will point the question out to me. So if questions pop up, please type them in at any point. So discernment. Now you've got people excited. You may have identified many more projects than you can realistically handle or bite off at this point. But, you know, let's find out what the congregation thinks in a more specific way. So usually in a feasibility study, you've got all your projects on the table. This is the time to break them down. I often tell people you don't want to waste your money on a feasibility study to find out that people don't understand why we would be doing this right now or why these projects are important. Those whys you take care of in discernment. The feasibility study, the important information you'll get from that is it will measure how aware people are of the projects and the needs and how much they're willing to support it. It identifies an attainable goal. You will explain the projects you're planning on doing and roughly what those costs will be and how that is linked to mission and ministry in your congregation. It also, you may identify some things you hadn't thought of. Maybe there's another campaign that everybody in the congregation is working on at this point. You'll also be asked to prioritize the projects. It could be that you're able to raise, let's say all of your projects add up to $1 million. You're pretty sure you're not going to be able to raise $1 million, but that's what the projects add up to. So we do a prioritization list, and you will get concrete feedback from the congregation of what projects are at the top priority. And that is a very important piece of information for the leadership to then go back to the drawing board and figure out which projects stay on the list and which ones we'll have to look at for a future campaign. We will come back to you with an amount we think you can raise. Feasibility study with us is done through personal interviews as well as written and emailed surveys. Everyone in the congregation is invited and encouraged to participate in the feasibility study. The other thing that gives you is a really concrete informational report that everyone has access to. And for the couple of people on the fence who thought, you know, I don't think the parish is really going to go for this and people aren't excited, you get a report back that says 98% of the congregation wants to go forward with this, end of conversation. It's a non-issue at that point. So I've moved very quickly through feasibility study. Usually that is, I find that is the exciting moment. People think, wow, we can really do this now. We go back to the drawing board with vestry or the campaign committee and finalize the projects that you want to go forward with for a campaign. So it could be some are modified. It could be that some are taken off the list. I know in the last 10 years, our the real hair-raising issue has been whether to remove your pews and replace them with pew chairs. We have found that that is a real hot-button issue, and it actually got nixed from a campaign immediately because it split the congregation right down the middle. So important information to know before you go talking to people about their support for it. So now, by the time you get into the campaign phase, the final phase, where you're actually asking people to make a financial commitment to support the project, people are waiting to support it because you have done such a great job of preparation. The final projects are presented in a complete, beautiful brochure with all that information. Leaders and gift workers, we call them gift workers or askers, are trained. They're recruited and trained. We do not do the asking for you. We want a good number of volunteers from the congregation to be willing to learn how to go and talk to a parishioner about participating in a capital campaign. It leaves you much stronger in the end for your annual and in a better place overall to talk about finances, stewardship, and commitment on people's parts. It also raises up new leaders because people are very engaged at this point in the process. The success is celebrated. Then all you got to do is celebrate and spend the money. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but for the most part, you get commitments of the gifts. There's a new energy. People are focused on the future and what is what their mission and ministry and goals are, because they have had the opportunity to participate in that whole process. So this is an example here of some of the materials. This is an example of a brochure that would be produced by us for your campaign for the last phase of the campaign. And this is very succinct. I always think it's like Christmas morning when you get to open these brochures, because it really encompasses everything that you've been working on. And this is one of the tools that volunteers are set out to make peer-to-peer asks. Any questions yet? I know I'm moving rapidly through this because I want some time for stories. I'd like to share some stories, or really I'd like to hear any questions you have at this point, maybe about feasibility study or discernment. See some typing going on. Okay. So I am not going to walk you through all of the details that we have on here, like giving charts and you know, the new construction and the amounts for this. But this is really after a whole lot of work. Your brochure really distills your aim, your vision, your goal, and your parish. I've had people say this is the best thing you could hand to a newcomer as they walk through the door, because it really sums up the work you've been doing together. Oh, we have a bunch of questions all coming in at once. Okay, well, great. This is good for my next slide. Because one of the things that's stressed throughout a campaign, and we come to it in discernment when you have small groups, we come to it in feasibility study when we're interviewing people, and then certainly in the final phase when you have volunteers talking one-on-one to people in their homes, is your story as a church, your personal stories, and listening to other people's stories. It really is that community building time, and really spending some time getting to know what the church, your church, has meant to people, and vice versa. Betty has asked, do you handle debt retirement differently than new construction? Debt retirement is an interesting, it's an interesting thing. I think it's much easier than flat out raising money for an endowment. If you have debt for a reason. So you would want to focus on the mission and ministry and what that money was spent on, so that's what you'd be highlighting in your campaign all over again. We spent this money in order to get A, B, and C. Now, are we pleased with this? The debt is holding us back again in our annual budget. If we can pay that off, then that will allow us annually to have that much more money to spend. Kim, for the dollar seems so great, and all our must-do building.
Wondering, there's so much to do in terms of building preservation over the next 20 years. Where do they start? Is everything, this is a St. Luke's Evanston kind of situation, I think. What do you tell them?
Okay. So an older building. Yeah, this reality is facing so many churches right now. You've got an old building with so many needs. What do? I actually had a client, or have a client in Evanston, Illinois, that looked at this question for 5 years and came out with such a thorough report. It was quite amazing. They balanced the cost of tearing down the building, of selling the building and buying a new building, of fixing it, of tearing part of it down, and weighed all of these things. It wound up in the end that they decided to have a capital campaign and fix the building that they had. They dealt with the worst issues first. I think, again, you start at the same place. It does seem like such a daunting task if you look at everything that you would have to do to keep the building up and running. But the focus groups, the small groups with people, will tell you how people feel about this. If you have exciting mission and ministry activities, if that building is being used, you need a building to do that in. And that becomes not just bricks and mortar. It becomes the future of your ability to do ministry. If there are other options readily available to you, then by all means, in discernment, that's what you look at. If tearing down a building makes more sense than fixing it, that needs to be looked at. So overwhelming, yes. I would say start with a budget. It doesn't have to be $2 million, here we go. You need to start engaging the congregation in what it means to have this building and how it enhances what God is calling you to do. How do you determine the financial wherewithal of a congregation? There's a couple of ways to look at that question, so I might ask for a clarification. But if you're trying to figure out how to determine your financial goal,
nope. To figure out if the congregate, how we know, is there an algorithm to determine the depth of funds that might be available to us through a tight-walleted New England church?
Well, first of all, rest at ease, because that's the norm. New England, that's my area. So it is tough. Again, there is no way to look at that until people are engaged in the need and the purpose for it. People's ability, there is not, I have one client, a rector in Chicago, who I told her I was going to steal her phrase. And she says, it's not a pie, it's a river. So the capacity of people to give and support their community is directly related in where it is in their hearts and their interest. And you're going to know that by engaging people. We figured this out in the feasibility study. There is a multiplier that we put on. We ask people to identify the range of gifts. So the nitty-gritty on that is, once we're at a feasibility study, we come back to you with an actual amount that we feel is a realistic goal for the congregation. And this part, I did want to touch on this earlier. This is very, very important. You want a successful campaign above all else. And if you are engaging at the beginning, the congregation is on board, the congregation sees the need, feels that this is the right time to do it, and that the church is on the right track, you will get support from your congregation. The financial capacity is then judged in the feasibility study. So this is also why we come back and say, here is a new goal. If you are testing for $1 million in projects, and we come back to you with a report that says 98% of people are in favor of this, but you should really only be doing a campaign for $500,000. That is our highest recommendation, that be your goal. You then go back and figure out what are the most important things, what have the most interest from the donors to the projects that they want to raise money for. And that is what goes into your campaign. That is the promise you're making with the donor, that if you raise $500,000, you will do A, B, and C. And what's different about that than maybe a library or a hospital that may say, we need $6 million, the end, we're going to do it until we get it. A church, if you decided, you know what, we still need to raise $750,000, so forget your $500,000, we're going to do a campaign for $750,000. You raise $500,000, it's a failed campaign. It doesn't feel good to anyone. And you want this to be a success for your church's DNA. You know how a failure like that can live on generation after generation. Well, the last time we did it, they didn't do what they said they were going to do. So it's very important to be specific about your goals, be specific and realistic about the financial goal, and that's what we help you with.
Leslie, do you want to say,
Yeah.
You want to say a word about prospect research?
Sure, yes. We do have the capability. We use Wealth Engine at the Episcopal Church Foundation. If a congregation is not sure about the capacity of giving of some of their congregants, we can do prospect research. I find really that the knowledge is there with the leadership, the rector, past records, but we do have that capability as well. For camps, conference centers, and dioceses, it's different because you're dealing with a much wider group of people who are not necessarily so personally known. tools used for feasibility study. So I'm not yes.
Gwen has asked if you could describe the tools that are used for the feasibility study. I think it might be helpful to walk through the process of interviews and surveys and then compiling the results.
Okay. Yeah, the feasibility study is compiled. We do a case statement, which is really a black and white document, very factual. It does talk about the history of your church, why you're planning on trying to do these projects now, how it's going to enable mission and ministry in the parish. And that is your tentative, what we call a tentative case statement. But this is really what you're proposing. We create with that a survey that corresponds to that. And we personally interview, your consultant would personally interview a certain percentage of your congregation. And that really is you want to interview people who have the capacity for lead gifts, people of influence in the parish, to see right off the bat what they think of the projects, where they are. And it sometimes gives you a heads up to things that you could tweak or take care of immediately. At the same time or immediately after the interviews, the entire congregation is surveyed, either through a paper mailed survey or SurveyMonkey done electronically. And then all of those results, all of the surveys are compiled by us into a comprehensive report. We include comments that people make unattributed. It's not like Sue Jones said she hates the rector sort of thing. But the comments are put in verbatim from responses. We find out who's willing to volunteer. It identifies, people are asked who they would want to serve on a committee or who they think would make a fabulous chair for the campaign. This is my favorite part of the report, actually, because it identifies so many people in the pews, and they really see when you report that this is going to be a group effort. There is a giving a range that we ask people to identify if they are in support of the projects. What range do they see themselves being able to fulfill over a 3-year period, usually 3 years, sometimes 4 or 5. And that is the mechanism we use to come up with the total goal amount for the campaign. I hope that answers your question a little bit. We come back on site with the report. I think it's preferable. Personally, I like delivering the report to the entire congregation. Sometimes it's just delivered to the vestry or leadership with people invited. And it just is, it's a great tool to move forward with, because there's super information in there and lots of things to be identified, and really a great tool for the next few years to keep referring to. Do you have any other questions? I was talking about the stories. You know, a lot of people have anxiety about, well, I've never had anybody come up and say, ooh, choose me, I love asking people for money. So there's usually a little cajoling and reassurance that goes into getting volunteers to agree to make peer-to-peer asks. But the training really encompasses getting people comfortable with telling their own story of their church, how they wound up at Grace, how the first time they walked into St. John's, Mary greeted me at the door and never forgot my name. Stories of children and parents and transformational experiences. And this is really one of the most rewarding volunteer positions that I've heard back from people saying, you know, I'm so glad I did this because I met so many people and connected on a new level. Um, so, let me see. So, the big question, can we do it alone? I will. I am going to, Terry's asking me to share a transformational story for a parish, and I am going to do that next. Often we're asked, can we do it alone? And I think the answer is yes, but the question should be, should we do it alone? And I very dramatically and probably over-exaggerating refer to this as, would you want to operate on a family member? It is very, very difficult to have a volunteer be the person who holds the congregation and volunteers accountable for a successful campaign. And vice versa. How do volunteers or the vestry or clergy hold a volunteer accountable for the success and running of a campaign, even if they have experience in this area? So we have the depth and breadth of experience throughout the Episcopal Church. We work with all Episcopal organizations, and I do in a year a number of more campaigns than a church would see in a generation in 1 year. So we are also, especially at this time in the church's history, gathering new information all the time from our consultants out in the field. New things they're seeing come up, new concerns, new ways that congregations found to solve certain problems. We're held accountable. We will get you, we have a higher goal potential, meaning we will push you past the comfort zone to keep making those calls and make sure that everybody has been contacted, thus resulting in a better goal total in the end. And we know what the highest ethical standards are. And the other thing is, we are outside of your parish. I can talk to the most frustrating person in your congregation and not be affected by what they say. And they, in turn, get heard and listened to. So I could go on and on about why I think it's important. If you don't hire ECF, hire someone is the recommendation. I did want to share, so a transformational story. I had a congregation that they hired us. They had a capital campaign about 10 years previously. And what I just explained happened. They ran over in one area of their campaign and spent too much money on landscaping and didn't get to finish the projects they had promised to finish. So you had a distrust. People thought, when we set up the small group meetings, the people who we trained to lead them were terrified. They were honestly terrified to be just talking to 10 people in their house. And I kept reassuring them, to saying, it's going to be okay. Just do this and talk to people. By the time I delivered the feasibility study, now granted they were in discernment for 2 years, very, very unusual, but they needed it. They really needed to build up the trust. But the congregation applauded. They were a completely different group of people. They trusted each other. They were in the same boat. They all had the same goal. And now it looked like they were actually going to be able to pull this off. And they just wrapped up about a year ago and did have a very successful campaign. And they're back to it being a vital church and already thinking about their next campaign. So there were a lot of pieces to that puzzle, but that was one story of it. So again, why ECF? I think, we covered this quite a bit. We know the Episcopal Church. We've had years of successful campaign management. The church and spirituality is the focus of our fundraising. We know why it's important, and we want churches to be able to embrace and explain that themselves. Our fees are decided on a sliding scale, depending on the size of the church. And this is important because smaller churches often cannot afford the fees from a consultant. If they have a very small, we've had a campaign as small as $60,000. So we're willing to work with every parish, no matter the size, to try to help them have a successful campaign. Also, any of the money that we do make goes back to the Episcopal Church through ECF Vital Practice and other services that we provide. I did want to read you one more. One more Nowen quote. Fundraising is proclaiming what we believe in such a way that we offer other people an opportunity to participate with us in our vision and mission. Fundraising is precisely the opposite of begging. When we seek to raise funds, we are not saying, please, could you help us out? It's been hard. Rather, we are declaring we have a vision that is amazing and exciting. We are inviting you to invest yourself through the resources that God has given you, your energy, your prayers, and your money in this work to which God has called us. That sums it up perfectly for me. And I hope if anybody has any other questions, does anybody out there, I wonder, have a story or thoughts on having participated in a successful campaign or maybe an unsuccessful campaign and what that did to the community? I'm getting a question here now. You address a concern that campaigns wear out volunteers. Yes. Well, that is, it's something to keep in mind. I do not think this methodology wears out volunteers. If anything, I think it energizes your volunteers. What I think does wear out volunteers is constant small fundraisers that put off really looking at some of your large needs, your bigger needs that should be addressed through a capital campaign. Discernment is not really heavy on volunteering. Feasibility study, even less. When you get to the ask, we do need quite a few volunteers, but we try with everything to make these the volunteerism digestible and not ongoing and not overburdening to anyone. You're not going to send somebody out with 20 asks. We'd really like people to have 6 to 8 at the most people to call on. The other thing I did also want, the other question that comes up often is, does a capital campaign affect badly our annual stewardship? Again, this is sort of that thought of limitation of funds, that if we ask people for the capital campaign, will they cut back on their annual? And as part of our service is we completely at all times stress that your annual fund is the most important gift that people can make. And then after they've made that gift, then and only then would we want them to consider a capital gift. And there's a lot more work we do about that. We have a question about the differences between maybe camp and conference centers and parishes. We have been looking more closely and working closely with some camp and conference centers. Very specific financial issues and needs facing them, as you can imagine, with their own mission and ministries. We do have a webinar, a web conference just like this coming up. We have a camp. Oh, we probably do on our cataloged web conferences. We also had what we call ECF School and had 5 camp and conference directors gathered in New York for fabulous 2 days of sharing and just really talking about ideas of fundraising and ways to reach your constituency. There are differences. Even for a diocesan campaign, you basically have the same methodology, but where you're going and looking for people and how long it takes to communicate to those people are different. So we do, you know, we are working with all of them and trying to get everybody financially empowered in leadership as well. Anything else? I know I've rambled on quite a bit here.
Leslie, while I'm giving people time to type, I know we have a couple of rectors on the call as well as many lay leaders. Can you talk about the role of the rector in a capital campaign? I know some rectors feel this is going to be a huge burden to them, and I thought it might be helpful if you could address that.
I'd love to. Yeah, that is, and with good reason, a fear for rectors. And that is also another reason to hire somebody from outside to help you with the campaign. The campaign really, in addition to being a community building, not exercise, but in actuality, you are building community. This has to fall to, and the most successful campaigns are led by strong lay leadership. In partnership, obviously, with clergy, but for the clergy person to say, okay, we're doing a capital campaign and I'm going to hold everybody accountable for their due dates and all is just a recipe for failure. So at the same time, you are focusing and visioning, and often that is what, you know, a goal of your clergy is going to be anyway, to have laity stand up and say, this is what we're doing, and this is why we're doing it, and these are the needs you've identified. If I get a rector who doesn't want to hand me over those lay names or identify those people, I work very hard to get the contact information for a couple of lay people to at least get them on board. So sometimes rectors are very happy to say, oh, this is beautiful, you take it, and others are saying, wait a minute, I'm not running the whole show. So this is where our 2 major areas of concern for ECF collide, and it is the leadership training and the financial wellness. And they go hand in hand. And by the end of a successful campaign, you really do have some reliable, transformed lay leaders who are really able to communicate with the congregation as well as speak about the health and financial future. Clergy, my husband is an Episcopal priest. I know this. They come and go. We've been in 7 congregations in our married life. This is your congregation. If I'm speaking to the laity and to the clergy, you know you're probably not going to be there forever. So you're visioning, but you're often visioning far beyond when your current clergy leadership is in place. So it's a very, very important time for lay leaders to step up. And we adore that. We're there to help you and give you the tools to help out. Anybody else? Terry, you have any other thoughts?
Let's switch over and discuss some of the resources that people might share.
I'm sorry.
Let's switch over to the resources slide, and in addition to the book that you would recommend here, let's talk about where they can see other webinars archived and things like that.
Okay. Again, ECFVP.org, that's Vital Practices. Many, if not all, of our web conferences have now been archived. So if you need help with vestry formation, that is there. Leadership Resources has done webinars on that. There's also Planned Giving. Coming up, you will see these are live and still to come. Visioning and Planning, the Basics of Parish Finances, Year-Round Stewardship. This is an area we're getting many more calls from congregations, realizing that fall stewardship letter just isn't doing it anymore, and it shouldn't be. It really is a year-round responsibility and engagement for the congregation. Vestries, Basics of an Endowment, and somebody else was talking about debt retirement. Here's a webinar all on debt, its impact, and what to do. We led a workshop really for a whole group of parishes in the diocese that were all looking at reducing debt and are actually working together on some ideas, as well as with one of our consultants for Capital Campaign to try to address those issues. And I'm sorry, I think I was saying that they are on ECFVP, but it's actually episcopalfoundation.org. That is the link right there below. So ECF Vital Practices is our leadership resources website, and it's very interactive. We have blogs and people writing from all over the country, and then the Episcopal Church Foundation has its own website where these webinars are cataloged, and there's more information on all of our areas of service there. You will again be getting an email with a link to the recording of this webinar, so please feel free to pass on to your colleagues, friends, neighbors. And you will also be receiving an evaluation, and we would really appreciate if you would fill out the evaluation for us so that we can continue to improve our content and information that you all are looking for. It is 8 o'clock, so unless anybody's got some questions, we can hang on the line for a couple of minutes. But I hope you've enjoyed tonight, and maybe it's inspired you to start thinking in a different way about how to raise money for your capital needs. And again, oh, thank you. We're getting applause out there. And again, if any of you have any questions or follow-up questions, would like a presentation or want to talk to ECF further, I'm going in the wrong direction here, please feel free to contact me personally. My email is here, Louise Baetto in New York, and we have the 800 number for ECF down there as well. Would love to hear from all of you. So thank you for taking time to hear us tonight.